Hi, everyone, and welcome to our panel, Suspense and Surprises, featuring some really exciting and suspenseful thrillers. My name is Allie Gosselink. I'm a library director from Calhoun County, Arkansas, and I'll be moderating our discussion today. I am so thrilled to welcome these four debut authors to talk about their twisty stories. We have Karen Parkman, whose early 2026 release, The Jills, is a gritty and close-up story of an NFL cheerleader searching, maybe just a little obsessively, for her missing best friend. Victor Suthammanont has Hollow Spaces, which is two siblings' journey to find the truth about their father's culpability in a murder. It's part legal thriller, part family drama, and very suspenseful. That one's coming out this August. Jennifer Trevelyan's A Beautiful Family. 10-year-old Alex picks up on a lot more than her family and others realize during a summer, which is also Christmas because we're in New Zealand, vacation to the seaside. This one's out July 2025. And then we have, last but not least, Mary Watson, author of The Cleaner, in which Esme, hellbent on justice for her brother's condition, masquerades as a cleaner for the Irish upper crust to discover their dirty secrets. That one comes out in July in the US and is out now in the UK. So I'm going to go around and have each of our authors introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about their books real quick. First up, Karen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Allie, for that introduction and for moderating. Thank you, Penguin Random House, for including me on this panel with this incredible lineup of writers. And I also want to quickly just say a thank you to librarians for the work that you do. As a chronically underemployed millennial who moves apartments a lot, I have relied on libraries to have access to books for most of my adult life. And I would not be a writer without libraries. So thank you for everything that you do and the work you do in the community. It means so much. So a little more about me. My name is Karen Parkman. I am a debut author. The Jills is my first book. And as Allie said, it's about a professional cheerleader for the Buffalo Bills, which is an NFL football team, named Virginia, whose best friend and fellow cheerleader named Janine also, she goes missing. So Virginia launches into an investigation into Janine's disappearance. It does get a little obsessive, and it forces her to uncover some really shocking secrets about her best friend, about the inner world of NFL cheerleading, and about Virginia's own family history. And it also compels her to confront her history with her estranged younger sister, Laura. So it's about family and sisterhood and how women can find themselves and claim their own power inside systems built by and for men. And I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for having me.
Right from the very beginning, this book kind of embodies that beauty is pain idea. And there were so many moments that I was just like, the things they do to be so beautiful.
Yeah. It's a real look behind the curtain. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Victor Suthammanont. I'm a lawyer in New York City. My debut novel is Hollow Spaces. And again, to echo Karen, thank you, Allie. Thank you, Penguin Random House, Library Journal, and all of you librarians and anybody else who's watching this panel. Hollow Spaces is about a man named John Lowe, who's the only Asian American attorney at a prestigious New York City law firm, who was acquitted of murder. And it follows his story after his acquittal in a dual timeline with his children, who 30 years later try to solve the crime. And his two children, his daughter Brennan, who believes he's innocent, and his son Hunter, who believes he's guilty, they come back together and try to solve the crime and what happened to their father. And they've been estranged from each other for decades because of this difference in opinion as to their father, and it tells that family story.
I loved this one. I feel like we get a lot of books that weave two storylines together, but this one really braids three, because you've got each of the siblings' perspective and then John's story too. And I just really loved how you wove all three storylines together. It's neat.
Thank you very much.
Jennifer, your turn.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's so exciting to be talking to you all the way from New Zealand today. I hope you can understand my accent. My book is a coming-of-age mystery novel set in 1985 on the Kapiti coast of New Zealand, where I spent summers as a child myself. And it tells the story of a young girl who befriends a boy on the beach, and together they decide to try and solve a local mystery. But meanwhile, her sister is going a bit wild, and her mother is doing things that she doesn't understand. And there is a man next door who is watching everything that they do. And this little girl is the only one who's really aware of that man. And yeah, as I say, it was inspired by my own childhood summers, which were actually very happy, but somehow when I sat down and started to write, it all went quite dark.
Yeah, this one is full of red herrings. Definitely thought I had some ideas about what was probably about to happen, and it did not go the way I thought.
Cool, that's good.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved it. Mary?
Hello, hi everybody. My name is Mary Watson, and I am originally from South Africa, but I was stolen away by an Irishman and now live on the west coast of Ireland. And I am going to talk a little bit about my new book, which is called The Cleaner. And in it, our main character, Esme, travels to Ireland from some unnamed country, which may or may not be South Africa. It's never quite clarified, and starts working for 3 different houses in a small enclave in a university town. But Esme is not really there to clean. She's come for revenge because one of the 3 women living in these 3 houses has been responsible for destroying her brother's life, and she's come to return the favor. The trouble is, Esme doesn't know which one of these 3 women is responsible, and she has to get into the houses, do a bit of snooping, and find out which one of these women was romantically involved with Nico. Working as a cleaner allows Esme to watch from the outside, but the problem is, instead of watching from the sidelines, she gets drawn in.
Esme is much more than she appears at first glance, which I really, really enjoyed getting to know her as a character. So I want to start out by talking about the atmosphere of each of your books. Not just the physical setting, although some of you that's what I'm going to ask about, but also like the way that you chose to set your characters and why that those were the decisions that you made. I think it says a whole lot about the real themes that you're working with underneath the story itself. So Mary, I'm actually going to start with you. The Woodlands is this like fancy, secluded Irish neighborhood. And the inhabitants of this neighborhood really have this perception that they are isolated and safe and separate from this, you know, less desirable, less wealthy group of people. Can you talk about the Woodlands itself? Is it based on a real neighborhood or an imaginary neighborhood? And what is it like? And what is it about this place that has this corrupting effect on Nico and maybe on Esme too?
Okay, so the Woodlands does resemble to some extent some places that I know in Ireland, but I have to say that Irish people in general are a lot nicer than the people that I've put into my books, because unfortunately, writing books about nice people doing nice things to each other isn't quite as interesting for me as writing about flawed people making mistakes.
Are these people
But the landscape here for sure influenced the book, and I really wanted to evoke that luminescent, slightly magical beauty of the Irish midsummer particularly. It's an incredible time of the year. There's nothing like June in Ireland, and I really, really wanted to kind of get that on the page. I also started writing this book. I was working on something contracted at the time, so I had to put it aside, but I started writing it in the very early days of the very first lockdown during COVID, and there was a real sense of the world reduced to my house and my neighborhood, and I really wanted to get that claustrophobic, close feeling, that feeling of the world having shrunk into the book. And so I think that comes through as well. And the Woodlands is made up, and it is a little exaggerated, but I think that one thing that rings true is the way that we can sometimes live alongside people and have no idea what they're really like and what's underneath the surface and who they are on the inside. And I think this is one of the driving themes for me of the book, was this difference between our outside self and our inside self, the version of us that we allow people to see on the outside, and our more private selves. And I think that Esme working as a cleaner has access to these private selves, and I think that was really important. And as to whether it's a corrupting influence, I think that's a really interesting question. For me, it's one of the big questions in writing. I'm endlessly fascinated by what makes ordinary people do bad things. Is it because of their environment? Is it because they're wired wrong? Is it because they're acting on impulse, or are they just rotten to the core? And I think that in the woodlands, both Esme and Nico's darker natures do flourish. And we do wonder, like, what is this? Is it something, is it flourishing because there's something in this environment that nurtures it? And I think that there is something of that in it, and that the woodlands is in some ways intrinsically chthonic. And I think that this kind of comes out in the Eden Hill sections in the book. But yeah, so I think that sort of answers the question.
Yeah, no, I think it really does. The isolation and the claustrophobia almost that you speak to in this neighborhood, it does almost create this lack of accountability at the same time. Like they can get away with maybe playing to their darker natures because no one else is really around to see what they're doing. Because it is this very isolated place. So the neighborhood of the woodlands, I very much pictured it as this very green, but
Yes.
also in a very manicured sort of way.
To some extent, I think the houses would be manicured, but there would also be lots of fields around, and the fields kind of have that real kind of wild sense. Yeah,
I love it. Very, very neat setting for the story. Like it added so much to the story, I thought.
it's quite inspired by my one. I mean, it's not a fancy neighborhood particularly, but it is very much inspired by the place where I live, which is kind of semi-rural, and it really kind of going outside and taking all of that in really was very inspiring for writing the book.
Beautiful. Jennifer, so your book does this very neat thing where instead of, not that the setting isn't very present, but what I found was the strongest perspective piece of your book is that she's 10. She's not a teenager. She's not an adult. She's very much looking at the world through the lens of a child. And so I'm curious why you chose to set her as 10 specifically. Like, what is it about that age that made her the perfect narrator for this very ill-fated family vacation?
Yeah, I think in some ways I was a little unimaginative because I set the book in 1985 and created this 10-year-old female narrator, and I was 10 in 1985. But on the other hand, I'm not surprised I chose that moment in time because I think 10 is a really magical age. I think, you're old enough to have a bit of independence and you're starting to question some of the things that your parents have been saying and the way you've been raised and the things you've been raised to believe. But at the same time, you're young enough to still believe in magic, really. And, when I was a kid, I was a bookish little thing and quite quiet, but I really wanted to have adventures. And I really woke up every day and thought, I'm going to have an adventure today, and then nothing ever happened because I had the most lovely, quiet, sort of ordinary childhood, which I'm very grateful for. But I wanted to create this little 10-year-old and give her a proper adventure that I would have loved to have as a kid. And it's just an age when I think life hasn't become really complicated yet. And I remember feeling very sort of strong and free and powerful at 10 years old. And I hadn't started to worry about, what do I look like? Am I popular? Am I cool? I hadn't started to worry about boys or girls, if that's what you're into. So I was just very sort of free. And now I think that's why I chose to make my narrator 10 years old.
I hadn't realized it until you said that just now, but she doesn't have a lot of awareness about how other people are perceiving her. Like her thoughts and her actions are driven by what she's thinking and what she's feeling, not by how other people might perceive her or what her body looks like in her swimsuit or any of these other like bigger girl concerns, right? She's just she's just watching and seeing where what people are saying isn't lining up with what they're doing.
She's this perpetual observer. And yeah, well, that is partly also about it being in 1985, because I think it's a different experience being 10 years old today, unfortunately. But this is pre-social media, and I think she is very unself-conscious, and yeah, she is just watching the people around her and absorbing everything constantly. And she's an intelligent little thing, but there's still a huge gap between what she understands and what the adult reader understands. And that was what I was interested in exploiting. And I knew that that was where the tension was going to come from in this novel.
I think you did an excellent job of exploiting the difference between how a 10-year-old could watch a situation unfold and how an adult could watch a situation unfold, and what they understand and what we understand would be entirely different things. And that space in between is where so much of your story lives. And I really loved that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, Karen, back to you. So I am a longtime Saints fan. I grew up here in Arkansas, but my dad was from South Louisiana. So that's the only pro team that I really know like anything at all about. But the Bills Jills thing cracked me up. Like the fact that they call themselves the Jills, the Buffalo Jills or whatever. Why did you choose the Buffalo Bills specifically as opposed to like another team? And did you get to do any fun research into this like behind the scenes world of dancing for a professional team?
Yeah, well, definitely, you know, the book is all research-based. I am not and have never been a cheerleader. I wish I had the physical coordination and the courage to do what cheerleaders do. But I was first introduced into the world of NFL cheerleading after stumbling across an article in the New York Times about a group of Buffalo Bills cheerleaders who are known as the Jills, and they were filing a lawsuit against the Jills, essentially arguing for fair pay. And this article really opened my eyes. It blew my mind. I'd always thought of cheerleading as this kind of sparkly, glamorous job that you got paid full-time salary to do. And, you know, learning more about what goes on behind the scenes, I just became totally fixated on it. I was like, I have to learn everything about this world. I read every article I could find about cheerleading. I interviewed several former NFL cheerleaders. And I learned a lot about the struggles that they face, but also like the bonds that they form with each other. And that sort of formed the heart of the book, and also gave me some sort of surprising details and inside secrets that I could, you know, show to the reader about this world that they may not know very much about. So that was sort of my introduction to NFL cheerleading, and Buffalo felt like a really perfect setting to explore like the hard work and the grind that goes into being a cheerleader, because, you know, Buffalo is an amazing city, but it's a tough city to live in. The winters are hard. It's you know, it's gray during the winter. It dumps snow, and the Bills, like, God bless the Bills, but like they have a history of just always losing. You know, they have this sort of like storied history of being the team that just can't catch a break. But I also loved how much pride and, you know, dedication there was in the city to the team, and to loving the city of Buffalo. So in a lot of ways, I think I was really interested in exploring this juxtaposition of cheerleading, which seems so sparkly and shiny, and showing that in this really like cold, wintry, hardworking, but big-hearted city. So the more I learned about Buffalo as I visited it and researched the book, the more I fell in love with it. And my hope is that the book can show, a little behind the glittering curtain of NFL cheerleading, but also into like the heart of a city that maybe readers don't know so much about.
So researching a little bit for this panel, I came across something called Flutie Flakes. Have you heard of this?
No, actually.
Okay. So what you said ties so much into this. You were talking about how the city of Buffalo, like the Bills might not be the winningest team of all time. They love them. They really love them.
They do.
There was a quarterback named Doug Flutie back in, I think, the 80s. And apparently he started a foundation, an autism foundation, and they made like frosted flakes, but they were Flutie Flakes. and they had his face on the box. And then at the 10-year and the 20-year anniversary of this release, they have re-released them. And so the joke I read was that literally everyone in Buffalo has an unopened box of Flutie Flakes in their garage. So maybe some of the audience that watches this later can like write in and let us know, do you guys have Flutie Flakes? But Google the boxes and look at the box covers. It's like the Wheaties covers, but it's just this one Buffalo Bills quarterback named Doug Flutie on the cover of these boxes of cereal. Like, they love their Buffalo Bills. Clearly.
They do. If anybody has a box of Flutie Flakes and just wants to talk about how great Buffalo is, like, I would love to come over for breakfast.
Karen's your girl. Karen's your girl. All right. Victor, on to other New York cities. The Big Apple itself. So there are so many New York City specific tidbits in your book, just like little places that they go and places that they are. It's really grounded in the city, and I think it was pretty clear reading it that you love the city too. And there's this one place on page 95 where Hunter asks a lawyer how he gets anything done with this amazing view of the city, and the lawyer responds, "It rains sometimes," which that would be me too. I would just sit there and stare out the window. So I just wondered if you could tell us about any specific places in the book, especially the restaurants, just out of personal curiosity, that are meant that you really love. Like, are there any real life connections in the book?
Yeah, no, I think most of the restaurants are based on ones that I've been to or amalgamations of them. There's no, aside from the one at towards the end, there's a bar, the Grange Hall they end up in. That was a real place and has since closed. Most of them are fictional. But it's funny that you mentioned that quote on page 95, because in fact it is raining today, and behind me is an amazing view of Manhattan that I had to pull the curtains down or I'd just be it looked like I was in witness protection. No, but I spent a lot of time thinking about the story and where to put it in New York City, and just the idea that I think it helps tells the story because it's a very crowded city. They're surrounded by people, and yet each of these characters, I think, feels alone so much, despite the crowd. And I thought that was a very helpful point in the story. But in terms of like I definitely drew on restaurants I love, and bars and other places, to help build some of the sense of where they were, having dinner or drinks in some of the parts of the restaurant. The setting of law firms. I've been in so many different law firm offices as a lawyer that I just kind of mashed a bunch of them together to make, to give the image of what it was like to work in one. And so, yeah, absolutely. Really appreciate that came through and that you enjoyed that when you're reading it.
Awesome. Yeah, and we're going to talk about food in your book a little bit more in a minute. So all 4 of these books featured sibling relationships, which I thought was the neatest coincidence. I have one brother, and our relationship is definitely not quite as complicated as any of the things happening in these stories, thank goodness. So we had 2 brother-sister dynamics and 2 that were just sisters, but all 4 sets of siblings in your books have this very layered identity. I felt like the weight of their combined history together creates this familial obligation and gravity between them, where even when they don't necessarily get along or even like each other, they have this connection that they can't fathom being without. So Jennifer, on page 123, their mother is really frustrated, and she's trying to get some information out of Alex about the situation that's just happened. And she's pretty sure she knows what happened, but she needs Alex to confirm it to her. And Alex just refuses. And their mom says, Vanessa's lucky to have such a loyal little sister. But from page 1 of the book, Alex has been trying really hard to create space between herself and her sister, who's like way too cool for them and kind of, leaving her behind. Can you talk about how this conflict between loyalty to Vanessa and resentment of Vanessa factors into Alex's decisions over the summer?
Yeah, I think I was the youngest of 3 girls, and I can distinctly remember that moment when the next sister up from me stopped being a child and left me behind. And on the one hand, you have this natural kind of competitive urge to keep up and not be left behind. And on the other hand, I was sort of repelled by what she was becoming. And I think Alex, there's this constant push and pull because Vanessa is leaving her behind and entering this adult world, and she's becoming this very exotic kind of sophisticated, moody, secretive creature. And Alex is quite drawn to that, but at the same time, she really doesn't want to become that, and she doesn't want to give up swimming for sunbathing and become, you know, a bit naff and boring. And so I think that she is loyal to Vanessa, and I think Alex lives by a kind of playground code of what you tell and what you don't tell, and so on. But she's also a bit horrified that she knows that this is what's going to happen to her, maybe. Also, I think in terms of her behavior and her decisions, Alex is trying to control Vanessa because she just wants to keep the family together, and she can tell that Vanessa's behavior is going to be really traumatic for everyone, and she just wants to control her and have her behave, which is not going to happen, and certainly no way a 10-year-old is going to be able to stop a 16-year-old from doing really what she wants to do on holiday. So it's a real spot that Alex finds herself in. But whenever she's really up against the wall, she does back Vanessa up pretty much, even though they are quite vile to each other. And when my agent first read the book, she said, "Oh my God, the sister is horrible." And I thought, oh, really? I didn't think she was that bad. I can remember riding in a car with my sisters, and I was always in the middle, and I didn't want any part of my body to touch any part of their bodies for no reason. They were, you know, it's just a natural kind of sibling feeling, I think, at that age.
Yeah, I think it is. I just have one younger brother, so I'm the oldest. And I recognize what you're saying, but from the opposite end. Like he was probably very repelled by some of the decisions that I was trying to make, because like we were kids and we were friends together, and then all of a sudden, like, I have very different interests, and I don't know, it was an interesting perspective shift for me, the way that you wrote her character, for sure.
Yeah.
Vanessa is kind of vile, a little.
Yeah, she's pretty awful on this holiday. It's interesting because I spoke to my oldest sister about this particular time in our lives, and she can't even remember it. She was more like 17, and she can't remember those holidays because she just had already kind of left us behind and was moving on, you know. Whereas my family at that age, when I was 10, was still my world, my absolute world, and I was hyper focused on every interaction between my sisters and my parents, and I was watching. And whereas, you know, you get to an age where you're just so ready to fly, and that's Vanessa's just on the verge of that, I think.
There's something interesting about that age too, because I feel like, and you do a really good job of showing this with Alex, she keeps getting really frustrated at these decisions that her family is making, because she can see like this train wreck coming, but she can't quite articulate what it is they're doing wrong. Like, I know that what you're doing is not going to end well, but I don't know how to tell anybody about what's happening. I'm just watching it.
Yeah.
Like the powerlessness.
She's very secretive. Yeah. Very secretive and inward looking. And you're right. She just has no control, but she just starts to side with people as the book moves along. She starts to sort of choose her alliances, and that informs a lot of her activity, I think.
Okay, that is like the perfect segue into my question for Mary about this choosing alliances. So Mary, one of the distinctions between Esme and her employers is the difference between the haves and the have-nots. And I think she sees it that way, and they see it that way too. And it plays out in various ways as the story progresses. And when she finds herself in this neighborhood because her brother has come home from there, changed, and he's definitely not changed for the better. Can you talk about what he represents for her family and their life and their livelihood, as opposed to the role maybe the other men in the story play in their families, and like why that makes her so hell-bent on this revenge that she's seeking?
I think that firstly, I also I love the question of siblings and sisters. I am also the youngest of a whole bunch of sisters, and I think growing up with that it has been such a formative thing for me. And this, like, I absolutely adore my big sisters, and I still do, and we're very close now, closer in a way that I would have been when we were kids. So I think that that's one of those things that kind of quietly influences my writing, that kind of relationship with siblings, that kind of closeness that I've had with them over the years. But as for Esme, in the book, there's a moment where she reflects on the idea of the haves and the have-nots. And for her, wealth isn't the most important measure of being a have. Esme is more fixated on love as being the most important measure of being a have. And she believes that when Nico was at home and when she had her loving family intact, that was when she lived an abundant life. And since Nico's return from the woodlands, she's experienced profound loss. And her driving motivation is now to either reclaim that love or to find justice to the person, and mete out justice to the person who's taken that love from her. And I think that what Nico means to Esme is something that the reader tracks subliminally throughout the book, because it changes as we read on. Initially, he's this golden boy who left his home, his poor hometown, to make a better life for himself through education. And he wanted to help his family out of poverty. But when this falls through, it's obviously a major blow. Because his priorities change, and this has consequences for everyone. We hear that he becomes self-centered because he's fallen in love. We hear that he's betrayed his fiancée, and that he's gotten involved in supplying illicit drugs all of a sudden, and he seems to become a completely different person to who he once was. And while Esme might not explicitly state it in the book, at some level she is aware that this is not some innocent prince that needs rescuing. At some level, she does acknowledge that there is complexity and nuance, even though she doesn't really want to admit this to herself. So when she plows on with their revenge, it's a way of kind of setting her path in fixating on her path and making sure that she's blinkering to the noise that tells that maybe things aren't the way you think they are. Maybe Nico is a lot more complicit in what's happened than you want to believe. And I think that for Esme, admitting his faults and his failures is a very, very difficult thing to do, and she avoids doing that as much as she can. And pursuing the revenge is definitely a way of avoiding that. And I think as far as the other men are concerned, I think that it's almost like that corrupting influence of the woodlands that we were talking about earlier kind of comes in, because the men who do live in the woodlands are not the best specimens. Link and Paul are both very, very flawed men as well. And it's almost like the longer Nico stays in the woodlands, that corrupting influence kind of takes over, and he starts letting loose the darker side of his personality.
In the beginning too, I feel like he's representing this like path forward for her family. Like, he's going to go to school, he's going to lift them out of poverty. This is how things are going to get better for all of them. Whereas these other guys in the woodlands are just kind of like feckless and hapless, and they don't care about anybody but themselves. Nothing needs to get better for anyone. They just kind of exist. And I just like, there was such a difference in the way that she saw him and what his, like, the expectations of what he needed to be for his family versus these other men who just are partying and whatever,
Yeah, I think that is one of the things that I wonder if readers get the extent, and I think some readers do, and I don't know if all readers do, the extent to which that is such a huge thing to have his scholarship revoked, that it is such a life-changing thing, not just for him, but for his whole family, for the next generation, that to take that step out of poverty is such a huge thing. And when he loses that opportunity, of course, Esme is going to become absolutely hell-bent on trying to find a solution, because it is huge, it's massive. The loss is much, much bigger than just, oh, well, he had to come home. It's a whole future that's lost.
I think that comes into play sometimes between siblings in a way that we don't see it between other characters, but maybe also in other relationships in our lives. Like the consequences of a sibling's decisions can be massive in a way that if it's your friend, that's not the same,
Yeah.
Okay, we are gonna move over to Victor now and talk about your siblings in your story, Brennan and Hunter, who are so similar in so many ways, even though I feel like if you told them that, it would upset them because they do not want to be like each other, but they very much are like each other. And they're both like their dad in ways that I don't think either of them sees either, even though they do recognize some of the ways that they're like him, but they echo him a lot. They both seem to have had this certain tipping point where the evidence for his guilt or innocence has added up and they've made their decision and they're no longer interested in evaluating it anymore. And I wonder if you can talk about how different pieces of evidence led to different conclusions for each of them and why. How they can feel so differently about whether or not their dad was capable of committing murder, even though they grew up in the same house with the same parents, they're seeing the same evidence. How do they come to such different conclusions about it?
Yeah, no, and I think the root of that particular issue comes back to the fact that they were so young when all of this happened. And so much of their evaluation of the evidence, I'll put that in air quotes, for them at that age was, I think, based on their relationship with their parents, and I think you can see with different even siblings, and especially with the gender issue, one's a boy, one's a girl in this novel, that can really influence the way people interact with a particular parent. And I think that really drives, let's say, the bias of the child at the time to think one way or the other, is my father capable of this? There's no way he's capable of this. And then part of what ends up happening is because they're young, and I talk about this in the book, it's not a Hardy Boys or a Nancy Drew story. Little kids generally don't go and try to solve a major murder. They just kind of stick with that through their whole lives. And so I wanted to explore that, but it also, I think, plays out in real life. You look at trials and you present the same evidence to a jury, all the jurors are sitting there with the same information and they come to different conclusions about what is proved or not proved. And as the siblings go and do their investigation, you can see them play that out as they take different pieces of evidence and run it through kind of their preconceived notions and trying to maintain objectivity, but losing it because of their relationship with each other or their memory of their father or the relationship with their mother, in the present. So I thought it was a great way to explore that, and just think about how people can come to really different understandings based on the same facts.
I loved how you created, with their mother's condition deteriorating and her finally being willing to confront, because I feel like she never really made a decision. She just refused to make one at all. And so her coming to this moment where she's finally ready to confront it and maybe talk about how she felt about it has given them, it's like it gives them permission to reevaluate what they think without having to feel like they have to admit that they were wrong necessarily. Like they don't have to give in to the other one. They can just start from scratch and reevaluate. And I felt like at some point being on the opposite side of each other was making them dig their heels in a little bit. Like, well, Hunter thinks this, so I think the opposite. Well, Brennan thinks this, so I think the opposite. And this really like gave them a place to put everything on the table and work through it together. And I just thought that was a really neat like framework, even for regular family conversations. Like, what if we start over from a place where people do not have an idea already and we just look at it all over again? It's a really cool concept. I like the way you set it up and made that space for them to reevaluate what they think.
Thank you.
Karen, Virginia, like all the girls, is working so hard and she is spending an absolute fortune to keep up all these like details of her appearance. Just to stay on the squad, even though like all of these relationships are really kind of surface level. And it's really cutthroat, even before you get to the fact that like they're being stalked and harassed. And that is so common that they just take it for granted. So on the other side of this story, Virginia and Laura really started to come into focus for me as sisters and as individuals when you meet their mother. And I felt like the reason that Virginia is so willing to put in all of this effort just to belong to this squad that gets a little clearer then. And so I want to know if you think some of that drive is rooted in competitiveness with her sister, and how that competitiveness with her sister factors into the decisions that she's making about like her obsessiveness about finding Janine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad to have a chance to talk about, the sisters in this book, because it really, I think the book really is about sisterhood, and it's about family and all the different ways that we define family or search for family. Yeah, I think, the way I sort of saw all of these things interweaving, I think comes from, an event you learn about early on in the book, which is that Virginia and her little sister Laura lost their father when they were young. Virginia was 11 and Laura was 9. And their mother was dealing with her own grief and really wasn't able to step up and give them the attention and the care that they needed after that tragedy. And, Virginia coped with that loss and with that grief by throwing herself and her little sister along with her into dance. And I really see the world of cheerleading and the world of dance as an alternative family for Virginia. I think it became for her the safe haven away from home, which was so quiet and sad after her father passed away, but she could go to dance practice or cheer practice, and there are people there, and there's focus and commitment, and you get these bonds that are formed from doing hours of practices in these high stakes, high adrenaline performances. And this is like a salve and a medicine for her after her family fell apart when she lost her father. So there's that loss that she's processing. And then as an adult, she experiences another loss when she and her sister become estranged after Laura becomes addicted to heroin. And, her sister Laura is the most important person in her life. So this is a huge, major event for her. And after this loss, she copes in the same way that she coped as a child. She throws herself into NFL cheerleading and into dance. And that's where she ends up meeting her best friend, Janine. And Janine, she's the one who goes missing. She becomes a sort of surrogate sister. And the sort of intensity of their closeness and, the deepness of their friendship, even though you find out she doesn't know Janine as well as she thought she did. But it really, it helps Virginia to heal from these twin griefs of losing her father and then her sister. And it's ultimately her search for Janine that brings Laura back into her life. So I see the relationships that Virginia makes through cheerleading as being really important to her. They're complex, and, like any friendship or like family relationships, they do have aspects of competitiveness or struggle, shared struggle. But I think it's through these relationships and cheerleading, like her relationship with Janine and her devotion to cheerleading, that you can uncover some of these deeper truths about her character and the foundational like family relationships in her life. They're very emotionally linked.
I definitely felt like she didn't have to compete with her mother for Janine's love. Right. But I think she felt like maybe second fiddle to Laura a lot of the time, or like it's a competition between them a lot for who's got mom's attention or who's exciting their mother more at this moment. Right. And so with Janine, she gets to be the exciting one because Janine is just that like over the top bubbly person.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think cheerleading gives her an aspect to like, wanting to feel attention and love and care. And that is something she's seeking as an outlet to fill some of that void that she has from childhood. Be this
vivacious, loud version of herself and have that and like be loved for that, be accepted for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we are pretty close to the end, so I am gonna do a lightning round and ask you guys, Karen, we're gonna stick with you, and I'm just gonna ask you to tell us what you're reading, what is lighting your brain on fire right now. If you're watching anything or listening to a fantastic podcast you want everybody to be aware of, what are you?
Well, I mean, first of all, so I started everyone's books here in preparation for this panel. I did not have time to finish them, but they're so good. So every book on this panel. But I'm also starting to dive in, not to do a galley brag, but I'm about to do one, to Culture Creep by Alice Bolin. And she writes these amazing essays about culture that are just so on point and really a cure for my cultural malaise. So this is a great thing if you're looking for nonfiction that helps you dive into pop culture in a way that is very soul enriching.
Always. Thank you. Jennifer, you want to go next?
I'm at the moment working on another book, and I find it quite hard to read when I'm writing, and I tend to dip in and out of things, and I get a bit scattered, and I look for inspiration. But I'm actually reading Conclave at the moment, having seen the film, and obviously it's quite topical right now. But I loved the film. I thought it was amazing, and I was really fascinated by how he created suspense out of the tiniest things. So I'm reading that to try and see how he does that, because I think that's a great skill. But often when I'm writing a novel, I'm dipping in and out and reading short stories, and I'll buy short story collections. I love Claire Keegan's short stories. I recently read several volumes worth of those. I sort of do deep dives into authors, and I also just look at things that inspire me for what I'm writing at the moment. But it does become a little bit tricky when I am writing, because I want to try and sort of stay in that voice that I'm in for the book I'm writing.
Yeah, I imagine so. I think that makes sense. Victor, what about you? What you reading?
I mean, in the literal sense, I was working a minute ago, so I was reading the federal securities laws. But
Beautiful.
no, but seriously, I'm reading Rachel Fahn's Restaurant Kid. It's a memoir about Canadian, Chinese Canadian, or her family's Vietnamese Canadian. They opened a Chinese restaurant, and she's another debut this year. And so it just sounded like a cool book, so I picked it up, and I've been reading it among many of the great debuts this year.
Love that. We ran out of time for my question about the food in your book, but I'm going to pick that one up because that sounds so good. I love that kind of stuff. I'm really interested in food and books in particular. Mary, what are you reading now?
Okay, so I'm nearly finishing The Death of Us by Abigail Dean, which is an exquisitely written portrait of a couple who had suffered through a home invasion that absolutely blew up their lives. And the culprit has now been caught. This is many years on. The culprit has been caught. The victim statements are being read. And the book gives a deep delve into how these characters are affected by this devastating crime. It's absolutely, absolutely exquisite. It's just so, so incredibly good. Amazing.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Your books are all fantastic. I highly recommend them all. Everybody go read them all. And thank you to Penguin Random House for having us, and to all the publicists who help us set all of this up, and to all the librarians who joined us today. And next up is going to be the lunch keynote with Kiesi Lehman. So stick around for that, and happy reading.